Great, thanks, Miriam. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Kerrin. I've put an alternative sort of spelling of my name, just in case the Irish spelling is tricky. But I'm Director of Work Psychology Group, and I'm also a visiting lecturer at City University here. I've been delighted to be involved in the My course since the first year of its delivery here, and I'm the module convener for the Psychology of Creativity and Innovation. And that's really my contribution to the Michael course here at City. Previous to that, and previous to my work at the Work Psychology Group, I was course director of the MSc in Organisational Psychology in the Psychology department here. So I was really interested in what Alan was talking about there earlier about interdisciplinary and different sort of disciplines. I was going to start off by saying I'm an organisational psychologist by training, and I think it's absolutely right. You kind of get some of that ingrained in you in that early degree. And I have to say, being part of the interdisciplinary centre has been huge learning and sort of development process for many of us in the faculty. I think Miriam might talk about that later on. But it's been enormously helpful to reflect on our own discipline and our own sort of research methodologies and approaches, and in terms of how we go about studying some of these things around innovation. So my research and practice is around, I suppose, assessment and development in particular, but with an interest around innovation. And I'm specifically going to be talking about individual level innovation in this talk. So I hope there's something in there for everyone as I go through some of my slides. I should acknowledge much of the team that's been involved in this. Fiona Patterson, who's done a lot of work on the innovation potential indicator that I'm talking about shortly, and also Lara Zavaras, who's a senior lecturer in the psychology department here at City, and Vicky and Annalise, who work with the team, mainly on sort of practical application of some of the work that we do around innovation within the Work Psychology Group. Are there any psychologists in the room? Okay, so I'll probably get to a bit halfway through that will be quite interesting when I start talking about measurement. You'll all go, boo. So these are the sorts of areas that I want to cover. And again, what I've learned over the years in working within the Michael, both of the students on the course and also in the faculty, there's a huge plethora of knowledge within the team and perspectives that people come with. And you're very generally a sort of a knowledgeable sort of group that we're working with. But what I want to just talk through is some of the common, I suppose, myths that we still come across in the work that we do in practice around the sort of psychological characteristics of innovators, and just touch base with some of those and sort of review some of those. But what I want to really talk about is some of the research evidence about what are the sort of most important characteristics of innovators. What does the evidence say? And how can we build on that to apply some of that in practice? The third area is where I normally get the boos in terms of how might we want to measure that. And I put my hand up here. I'm a psychologist. I tend to want to look at measurement of individual differences and behaviours, and that's my sort of perspective, I suppose. I'm coming from that. And can we do that in a reliable and valid way? And again, in terms of what Alan was talking about there, we are pretty fixated on things like reliability and validity, and I suppose that's our currency. But I suppose I'll just share with you about how we might judge some of those sort of tools and measurements in that reliability and valid way, and then a little bit about how we apply that in practice to support, particularly, I suppose, a lot of the work that I get involved in is looking at large-scale organisations who are looking at supporting talent identification and development around innovation. How might they do that in a reliable and a sort of effective way? So hopefully we'll cover some of those, and there'll be something of interest for everyone in there. So some of the common myths, this is, I joke with Fiona and say whenever she's not here, I'll say that's her sort of self-image. But to what extent is it sort of creative oddballs and sort of the genius type is often a very common myth. But also about, to what extent the stereotype about people constantly thinking out the box, and they're constantly sort of doing things differently, and sort of this person that's always doing something out of the box and out of the normal. And of course, in reality, in most organisations, that's not the case of what you want necessarily with an innovator. I quite like this particular quote by Frank Barrow back in the 60s in terms of trying to understand the profile of an innovator. And this is about the creative person being both more primitive, more cultivated, more destructive, and a lot madder and a lot saner than the average person. So there's a lot in there in terms of trying to understand what is it about this sort of creative and innovative person and the characteristics within there. And when I come and talk about the research evidence, it's complex. We're talking about a lot of complex individual differences here. And how can we tease out which of those are important for innovation? These are, I suppose, some of the common myths, particularly on psychology of creativity and innovation. As I say, many of you, the work that you may be involved in this area, about the assumptions that there are only a few people that are creative, that innovators are necessarily oddballs, that idea generation is innovation. There's a lot around lateral thinking being enough, and that's actually what you have to do in order to be innovative. It's about this notion of lateral thinking. Implementation being the easy bit. Many of us that are involved in sort of innovation and application of innovations know that that's not the case. The actual implementation is the hardest bit. My favourite bit in terms of the myth is about the propensity to innovate decreases with age. That's actually a myth. And as people like ourselves knocking towards 50, I'm delighted with that kind of myth. So we as we grow older, that there is no reason why we can't continue to be creative and innovative. And some of the other aspects around creative problem-solving methodologies and so onwards. So these, I suppose, are some of the myths, but what actually are those characteristics and behaviours of innovators? I think if we had a bit more time, I'd probably be asking you to sort of share some of those with each other, but does anyone want to share with me what you think some of the characteristics might be?
So persistent.
Persistent, yeah.
People who listen.
Listen, that's, yeah, interesting, yeah.
People who are curious.
Curious, yeah. So motivated to sort of engage in the problem solving or innovation, yeah.
Diverse range of interests.
Pardon?
Diverse range of interests.
Yeah, okay, so open.
Really broad.
Yeah, broad to sort of things, not narrow in terms of their pursuit of things. Any other ones?
Risk takers.
Risk takers, yeah, so willing to fail, I suppose, if things don't go wrong.
Ability to adapt.
Yeah, okay. In terms of...
responding to how it progresses.
Yeah.
So starting with an idea and then it changing and then being able to adapt to some feedback that comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. So adaptation or tolerance of ambiguity in particular is a real area that can... Any other ones? Any other cool ones?
Openness to experience.
Sorry?
Openness.
Openness, yeah. Okay, so I think that's similar to that sort of broad range of interests, isn't it, in terms of openness to new ideas and things.
Conscious of their own thought processes.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, go.
Conscious of their own thought processes.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Conscious of their own thought processes was here. So it's about how self-reflective they are. I think that's a really interesting area, particularly around the team, leadership teams, about how reflective they are as a team about how they're performing and acting.
Facility with words, pictures, spaces.
So in terms of
ability to articulate what they are thinking.
yeah, okay. So communicating with others or motivating others in terms of the ideas and movement. Yeah, I think in terms of engaging with others, I think that'd be more broadly concept around that. I mean, maybe we'll come on to some of that when I start looking at the literature, but many of the things that you're talking about there are quite a broad range of things there, and I'm going to try and capture it in terms of what the evidence base tells us about some of these characteristics. So, a number of years ago we were asked to, by Nesta, in fact I suppose that while Nesta worked a lot with social scientists, they hadn't really invited many psychologists in at the time. They were particularly interested in looking at the characteristics and behaviours of innovative people. Both Fiona and myself had done research previous to that in this area, but it gave us a great opportunity to look again at some of the evidence base and the literature in this area. And so we presented some of that work back in sort of 2009, 2010, and more recently we've revisited it again in terms of the evidence base. What we did in terms of focusing on it, we looked across the broad resources within an organisation, but particularly what I'm going to talk about in a minute, just in terms of the research evidence, is specifically focusing on the employee and the individual. What is it that individual brings? What does the evidence tell us around some of these areas here that you've all just mentioned there around important characteristics? And importantly, which of those are perhaps the most important to focus on? So if you're looking at identifying people or developing people, where should we place best effort in terms of getting the more likelihood of people developing in that innovation context? The main areas in terms of psychological literature, and again, these four areas around intelligence, personality, motivational qualities, or domain-specific knowledge, in and of themselves are huge academic areas. I mean, there are a huge number of research published in that area. But innovation tends to talk about these areas as important. So how important is intelligence for innovators? How important is aspects of personality? What motivational qualities do you need? And to what extent you need domain-specific knowledge? But in many of the previous research that we looked at tended to look at them in separation and in isolation. I think this really does draw upon some of the things, again, that Alan was talking about in terms of the silo mentality, in terms of academic research often within this area. And a lot of the work that we were looking at is drawing together those aspects of those 4 key areas. And I just want to draw upon some of those to give you some highlights as to what it says. So, are innovators more intelligent than the general population?
No.
Got a couple of yeses,
No.
a couple of no's. Maybe 70-30 on that sort of thing. I mean, I think the question might be more important is how much and what type of intelligence is needed, because we are now, I suppose, understanding more about intelligence in terms of its breadth and, you know, what we mean by intelligence. So in terms of the actual area of research around intelligence, some previous work that looked at sort of aspects of general intelligence, some people feel that innovation and its link to intelligence revolves around this aspect of divergent thinking. And where that comes from is this model around Guilford's model of the structure of the intellect, and that divergent thinking is one aspect of that part of intelligence. What's interesting, I suppose, with this sort of model is while divergent thinking is still very popular, we use it a lot, I've used it a couple of times already together, it's kind of, we all know what we mean by that. This actual model hasn't really stood up to scrutiny in terms of intelligence and what we know about intelligence now. So it's a kind of an interesting thing in terms of understanding why or what aspect of intelligence is important. Some of the other areas around intelligence are linked to some of these other researchers, probably the ones that people will be more related or interested in or understanding is around the work that Isaac did in terms of genius and high IQ. So that picture of that mad scientist that I showed you earlier. To what extent do people have to have a huge high IQ to be innovative? And the other sort of areas around Ward et al. Is looking at areas of to what extent they have to have high level of cognitive abilities and mental processes. If you look at all of that literature, and again that's probably 100 years worth of literature in a whole range of different areas, what the conclusions are across the board is you need a certain amount. Clearly you need to be able to articulate and communicate and have a level of intelligence, but it isn't consistently linked to innovative working. You know, and I think that's probably an important part of demystifying some of those myths around intelligent working. I think for most of us it's a bit of a few, so thank God for that. But I think it is really, really important to move away from this notion of this genius and innovator, particularly within organisations where you're trying to engender a culture for innovation. The other question we get asked quite a lot is, you know, are there different types of personality? You know, what type of personality is it that innovators should have? And some of the evidence base in this area is really interesting. You know, to what extent the research has consistently sort of identified innovators as having sort of imaginative, self-confident, autonomous, high energy, the sorts of things that you're talking about there in terms of having a high tolerance for ambiguity. And I think on the darker side, as it's kind of described in the literature, is this notion of an innovator being sort of disorderly, outspoken, quarrelsome perhaps, and in the extreme, psychopathic. And, you know, those of you that are thinking of those innovators that you work with, they can be kind of difficult to manage sometimes, you know, either manage or, if they're your boss, quite difficult to be around. And what role do some of these darker sides of personality have a role in innovation or innovative behaviours? So a lot of the literature has been looking at some of that in terms of the relationship with things like psychopathology and innovation, and also on the more favourable aspects of personality traits. So, you know, to what extent being low on neuroticism is important in terms of being an effective innovator. So I'm just going to perhaps summarise some of those in terms of the core areas of personality. For those of you who aren't familiar with personality literature, that there's broad consensus that there's sort of 5 broad sort of dimensions of personality: extroversion, neuroticism, openness to experience, agreeableness and conscientiousness. And across, you know, many different studies that have looked at various aspects of the role of personality of innovation, openness to experience, you know, consistently predicts innovation and behaviour in the workplace, and is the main sort of factor really associated with creativity and innovation. In a minute I'm going to show you some data around conscientiousness, because there is growing evidence that conscientiousness can have negative relationships with innovation, and that I think has huge implications for things like HR policy and practices, which typically recruits people into organisations on high conscientiousness. and to what extent are we recruiting out people on other aspects of that. So, many other key resources that are important. I'm just going to draw on a few of those. One, which again Alan talked about in terms of the domain-specific knowledge, a huge amount of work around motivational qualities, so how important are intrinsic motivations, goal orientation in terms of driving you through that innovation activity. And Teresa Mabely's work has really given us some really good information there about the importance of motivation. And there is an emerging literature around emotional intelligence. Now, who I think we're talking later on today around emotions, I think there's some interesting stuff coming out there in terms of the role of emotional intelligence. And finally, particularly for leaders of innovation, the evidence base is growing around the importance of self-efficacy and resilience. You know, the ability to bounce back from a failure or problems in an innovation project or solution. So I think these areas are growing in terms of understanding, particularly around interventions. You know, how do we give our people in our organisations who are tasked with innovation the sort of competence or the skills or the ability to bounce back from something which can be quite challenging context and environment. Okay, I'm coming on to the last bit, which is about measuring. I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of some of this stuff in a reliable and valid way. In terms of how we might measure innovation, you know, many of you may do the first one, which is, you know, I know an innovator when I see one. I work with a lot of them, I just know when I see one. And that might be a completely valid thing for you within your organisation, perhaps in a small organisation that you're working with. It might be about observing them on the job or over time, in terms of do they demonstrate some of that. Or it might be about self-assessment or reflection, so to what extent do they reflect and learn and sort of grow and develop as an innovator in that context. Primarily what I'm talking about in terms of measuring is often in large-scale organisations or looking at bringing talent through an organisation, and the questions for that measurement is, you know, what are you looking at, and how do you know that measure will be valid and reliable? And that's a lot of the work that we've been involved in identifying the criteria of those characteristics that you're looking to identify, and how might you measure them reliably to feed into development and training, for example. A couple of examples of how people have done this in the past, very much about divergent thinking, so you know, how many users of paperclip, you know, is that really a useful measure of innovation? I don't know. Cognitive ability tests and many, many different personality measures. The major criticisms of those approaches to innovation, measuring innovation, is they're singular. They either look at intelligence, or they look at personality, or they look at motivation. And again, they don't integrate what is quite a complex thing around human beings and human beings being innovators in terms of this multidimensional approach to innovation and measuring innovation. So the work that we were very much involved in has been trying to challenge and task ourselves with taking a much more multidimensional approach to understanding the measurement and development of innovation. It's not just about personality, you know, it's not just about intelligence, it's about all of these things and how might we best measure them. So taking that multidimensional approach, this is the sorts of approach that we're taking, or have been taking and developing and looking at some of our studies, in taking a multidimensional trait-based approach which looks at 4 areas: motivation to change, which has got that motivational component, challenging behaviour, which might have some elements of personality within that, adaptation in terms of, you know, to what extent you like to do problem solving in the same way, and consistency of work style, which to some extent is looking at areas of conscientiousness. Some of the example items there in terms of this particular measure, I'll just show you. Consistency of work style. Just to, I suppose, demonstrate where we go with some of that approach towards measurement is then looking at the reliability and validity of it. And in terms of that particular measure, we've looked across manufacturing and retail in particular. We've demonstrated the internal reliability of that particular measure in terms of an alpha coefficient measure, interested in that kind of measures. And also, most importantly, what is the predictive validity? So if you sit or take those sorts of measures now, you sit here and fill it in, how do I know you're going to perform or behave innovatively in the job moving forward? And this is what these sorts of studies have done in terms of following people into the workplace, looking at how they perform, having some independent assessment of their innovation and behaviour in the workplace. What we do know from this work is that the motivational qualities are the most predictive and most important outcome, indicators of innovation outcomes. And in terms of channeling effort into interventions, they're the areas that's most important for both leaders and innovators. I've got some more information if people are particularly interested or interested in the sort of psychometrics behind it and the psychology and the science behind it. But primarily speaking, in this particular approach, the motivation to change and challenging behaviour are positive predictors of innovation, whereas consistency of work style, so methodical, dutiful, orderly, and adaptation, so wanting to do tried and tested things, tend to be negative predictors of innovation. And what we've kind of got to in terms of the evidence base around this is that this multi-dimensional approach is a much better predictor of innovative behaviours than single approaches like personality cognitive ability tests. So having that multi-dimensional approach is really, really important. I have got another study there if people are particularly interested. This is a more recent one that we've looked at in healthcare GPs. It's in the news this morning, so we're a bit short of GPs at the moment, but also their job roles massively changed. They are having to do things very differently with less resources, and so innovation is becoming a huge important part of that particular context. What this particular study was doing was looking at to what extent the IPI can predict behaviours in practice of these people, and this particular study looked at it alongside a particular personality measure. The outcome measures, and again we could talk ad infinitum about how do you measure it, you know, what is the outcome measure that you're looking at, how do you measure innovation in the workplace. For this particular study, that gives you an example of what that outcome measure was. It was a creative problem-solving sort of exercise that was part of a process they were going through, and they were being assessed in terms of the behavioural markers in that exercise. I could talk more about that if I had more time, but I won't. Just briefly on that, I won't go into some of this, but again, this is sort of demonstrating that motivation to change, again, is the most important predictor of innovation in the workplace, over and above some of the other aspects that we talked about. But most importantly, I think I just want to leave it, we conduct things like construct validity, and you don't necessarily need to know the detail, but what we're looking at here is to what extent the innovation potential indicator factors correlate with existing measures that we know are reliable and valid. So down the left here, we're looking at things like neuroticism and so onwards. What we would have predicted on the top is that the first two are positively related to innovation. So motivation to change and challenging behaviours. So motivation to change, there you can see, is fairly positively correlated with most of the areas of personality dimension, but negative with neuroticism. And adaptation and consistency of work style is negatively associated with innovation. We would have hypothesised that consistency of work style would correlate with conscientiousness, because, as I said, this is broadly about order, methodical, dutifulness. But we weren't really expecting the correlation with motivation to change. So when we looked at that in a bit more detail, this is where I get to the nitty-gritty of some of the aspects around conscientiousness. What you'll see is consistency of work style, which, remember, is a negative predictor of innovation, correlates most highly with things like sub-facets of conscientiousness, like order, dutifulness, deliberation. Whereas motivation to change, its correlation with conscientiousness is things like competence, achievement striving, wanting to get the job done, which is very, very different in practice and behaviours to some of these other things around order and dutifulness, seeking permission. And why that is so, I wasn't going to say exciting, but it kind of is to psychologists and stuff. Why that's so exciting is, you know, our organisations, as I said earlier, typically recruit most of our graduates on orderly, dutifulness and so onwards, and don't necessarily highlight some of these other areas that we know relate to things like motivation to change and drive to push innovation through. So I hope that's not too much of a blur, but I kind of wanted to get to that punchline. Now Marianne's going to turn me off now, but some of the practice stuff, again, I could go into a bit more detail, but you know, that's some of the theory side. Most of what we do is looking at applying some of that in practice in terms of taking leaders and leadership teams through innovation, understanding where they are, and some of that supporting the development, feeding team innovation, and of course developing a culture for innovation. I suppose I'm going to finish on this last bit. I know I'm just talking about this bit here, and there's a whole load of other stuff that goes into innovation, and this is for a particular organisation we're working with. But I suppose from our perspective, we see it as a building block for that self-reflection, self-awareness, and for moving forward with other sort of innovation and cultural change within organisation. So I'll leave you there with some of the summary. For you go home with two things. One, motivation is really important. And two, we need to, particularly in large organisations, we need to be really careful about some of the contradictory practices and policies that we have in place. Thank you very much.
Would you like to set up? Or?
we,
Yeah, that's fine.
yeah. So
That's fine.
many thanks to Maura. We're fellow module leaders on the Michael, and so if you're interested in more, come do the Michael, do her psychology module. Very interesting what you said about